Oh, don't tell me I was muted the whole time.
From the start. No, you're fine. You can keep going.
I just realized that I was muted, so just a brief introduction now. It's my real great pleasure to introduce Pam Winfrey, who's the Director of Arts at the Arizona State University Center for Cancer Evolution. And she's really been sort of a leader in integrating this understanding of cancer with the arts and how that they can really enrich each other, and how this can be beneficial for patients and for researchers as we think about these this horrible disease. So without further ado, Pam, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, James, for that. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good morning. My name is Pam Winfrey, as James said. And I'm so happy to be here to talk to you guys about the relationship between art and cancer. Let me just say a few words about myself. So my background is that I started at the Exploratorium, which is a museum of science, art, and human perception in San Francisco. I was 21. I was mentored by Frank Oppenheimer, who was Robert Oppenheimer's brother. And I'm sort of cellularly, that is my biggest influence, because he was a flute player, but he was a physicist, but he was both, right? And he really understood this art science thing. So I grew up there, and I did projects on everything from brain-computer interface stuff with Berkeley to digital and analog clothing. I mean, I just did a ton of different things where we really tried to understand this linkage between science and art. So about 6 years ago, James, it does seem like it's been a heck of a long time, but it's only been 6 years. I was brought down to Arizona to start this cancer project. And Athena Actipis was really the person that brought me down. We were actually in a place, it was a salon called the Philosophers Club that had been started by a squirrel researcher. And that's where we met. And then she brought me down here. She was really interested in trying to get this art science thing going. So this is an exhibition. I find it's a small exhibition, but it's been very interesting because people are really starting to get very interested in interrelating this concept of cancer and art. So this is called the C word. I suppose now there is another C word in disease, which is COVID, but this was the first C word. This show is currently at the 850 Biomedical Building in Phoenix, which is a research building. So the researchers had to go by the artwork all the time. Come on, you. Now that's interesting. The arrows do not work. They did work.
It's because it wants to.
Oh, thank you. So shall I just use that instead?
No, you should be able to. I was trying to get that to go away again.
Oh, over here.
Oh.
Right there, hide floating. Yep.
James.
Gosh, it's good to have you, James. Okay, now we're doing, okay. So the first question I'm sure you guys are all asking, although maybe you aren't because you're actually here, is why should a cancer research center have an arts program? Why not use that money for new, better projects, computer modeling? There's so many things that you could use, that you could spend this money on. But I maintain that this is really critical work. So these are the things that we want to do. We want to create thought-provoking, aesthetic, inspiring, even playful artworks that do these things. They provide an equitable, mind-expanding, interdisciplinary environment for artists and scientists to collaborate. I cannot tell you how important that is. Because when you get in those rooms and you see scientists and artists working together and talking together, it's like being at the seashore where there's like the waves are coming in and then the land is coming in. The waves are coming in, the land is coming in. That's dynamic. That's the definition of dynamism. We want to change the way that people respond to a cancer diagnosis. We want them to feel more agency and perhaps more interest in the science behind the disease. We also want to help doctors understand what patients and their families are going through when they receive a cancer diagnosis. We want to provide a safe space and experience for families and friends to talk about cancer. We want to be a catalyst for this safe place. We want to be able to use art so that families can come together and go, do you remember what happened with Aunt Trot? Well, these artworks are dealing with what she went through. We want to embolden young, any kind of students, disadvantaged or advantaged, to engage in computational cancer systems biology's activities. I feel like art is kind of a gateway, you know, it's a gateway to new ways of thinking, and possibly those art students who are really, really smart, we can figure out a way that they are interested in science as well, because it's through the artwork that they become, we'll see, Alex is a great example of this. We want to communicate with potential researchers, clinicians, and patients in ways that words do not. Visual learning, we know that people learn different ways. This is a visual way of learning. Then the final thing, and really most important thing, is we want to bring cancer out of the closet of shame and fear into the light of understanding, awareness, and knowledge. That's a really important part. So these are the exhibition views at 850. The nice thing about this exhibition is it can go anywhere. It's designed to go anywhere, and it's designed in different elements. They're all crated. This is the piece I was referring to. This is by Alex Kagan. These are images of ISEEK, which is a conference that happens every other year. And what he does is he actually watches the speakers, then he does these little portraits of them, and then he also boils down the premier concepts of the speeches themselves. And Alex is a great example because he started out as an artist, and he's now a premier cancer researcher. He just had an article published in Nature, James informs me. So these things go back and forth, and he's still doing the art, but now he's a really good cancer researcher as well. So this is another small piece. It's called Sick Note. It's a 15-second clip of a show that's on Netflix right now. And you'll probably recognize him. It's Rupert Grint, who was in the Harry Potter series. And he gets this cancer diagnosis. And it's 15 seconds of what a patient might feel like when they get a diagnosis. Erin McGee-Farrell, who we'll talk about later, she talks about it as like PTSD. You get this diagnosis, and then all of a sudden they turn around and say, okay, what do you want to do? And you are the last person at that moment who's able to think about what you want to do, because you're like a deer in the headlights. This is a piece called Remembrance Tree. There's a whole art style called social practice, and it really uses people as the medium. So here, it's a very simple thing. You just sit down, there's little metal plant identification tags. You think about somebody who's been impacted by cancer, and then you add it to the tree. But by the end of any kind of event, all of a sudden you look at this tree and you go, wow, I'm not alone here. There's a lot of people who are dealing with this particular problem. This is Erin McGee-Farrell's work. She's had a double mastectomy. She's an amazing artist. This is a very long canvas piece. It's 17 by 4, and it's embedded with NFCs, which are these sort of localized ways of getting information. And you can actually get access to all sorts of other artworks and by other artists as well as Erin. And she's the one that really taught me about this PTSD thing. When she got her diagnosis, she was handed this inch-thick book, and they kind of put it on the table, and she looked at it, and she's a visual learner. She never cracked it, because this was like, it was like all you need to know about this disease. And it was just not in the right form that she could understand it or wanted to understand it. Okay, so this is called In Search of Chemozoa. This is a digital visualization of a speculative creature. Let's see if we can get this to work. This is actually in different forms. So it can go into film festivals, which it is right now. It can go into large scale darkened rooms as an immersive thing. So it's got a lot of different ways that you can access this. And this is just a 1-minute teaser to give you an idea of what you're looking at.
Something had changed. There are a great many uncanny sounds below the water's surface, and now, among them, a new chorus.
So I think one vision of the future is that everybody will get cancer at some point in their lives, but you'll just live with it. And so it'll just be a normal part of a stage of life.
Angelo has managed to cultivate some amazing organisms in the lab. They're simple multicellularity. They don't have as many tissues as we do.
One thing we think about is evolution as a great problem solver, and then can we translate that into doing better cancer prevention in humans?
Why these animals, they are not developing cancer, and that they have something that we don't know.
A song made of 1,000,000 frail voices united in a search.
Okay, this is all new, different. Sorry. We got it all figured out and now it's all different. Okay, thank you. So this is by Boredom Research. They're a duo out of England, and they were commissioned to do this piece on digital visualization. What's interesting is that it's a speculative fiction piece. So for example, this chemozoa is a creature that actually requires toxicity to as part of its life cycle. So all sorts of questions can come up when you're thinking about this kind of a creature. Is that possible? I was also a host for the Leonardo Art Science panels, and we brought Michael Metzger, who is one of the few people that he's the guy that figured out that there's communicable cancers with mussels and clams. So we actually had the artists and the science together talking about what that's like in reality, what that's like in fiction, and then what the future could bring. And he said he thought that there's definitely more critters in the oceans that are going to have communicable cancers. This is a piece called Still Max by Max Dean. It's a film, an hour and 19-minute film. But what's interesting about this is that it can function like you see it here with just images and this trailer, or it is actually
I'm
a
known
film.
primarily now for this piece called the robotic chair, a generic looking wooden chair that falls apart and puts itself back together. There's this potential explosion going to happen in your body. Feeling powerless is a very important thing, because how do you know when you do have power if you don't know what powerlessness is? I have to solve the problem visually. It's nothing new for me to fall apart and put myself back together.
James, where was that? This one? Okay, great. So this is an interesting piece because Max has had prostate cancer for 10 years. And when you have those kinds of diseases for a long time, it's creeping into his artwork. And he talks a lot about identity, what it does to get these kinds of diagnoses. And he's just a really interesting guy. He's going to come in. These are products, these are residencies. So a lot of these pieces are the result of the artists. They came into our labs. This piece is not one of those, but a lot of them they came into our labs, and it's a direct result of relating with the scientists in the labs and their ideas. And again, this science art conversation really is interesting in terms of what comes out of it, and not only the thinking that comes out of it, but also the artworks themselves. So this is another piece by Erin. Because she had this double mastectomy, she realized that this book was not doing it for her. So she was trying to figure out other ways to communicate with people. So she created this paper doll project. These paper dolls are actually, they're very playful, but they have real information like, what do you need by your bed when you have a double mastectomy? It turns out that you're like this. You're like, as she expressed it, a pterodactyl. You can't put your arms any further up than your waist. She was, it happened over Christmas, so she made everybody buy Christmas tree bulbs that had pterodactyls on it because she was, or no, I'm sorry, T-Rexes. T-Rexes, not pterodactyls. And then she also does a lot of her own work. These works are all curated. I would say I am an artist, but I'm more of a curator in this particular situation. And these are all artworks that are designed to pull you in, not push you out. Some contemporary art, you basically just go, oh man, I did not want to see that. I did not want to be exposed to that. None of that is true with this particular show. This is the nature of cancer cells. We're hoping that you actually will get this metastatic piece right here. So this piece is by Susan Biner. She was in residency at ACE, and she realized that there were a couple of things that were really interesting to talk about. This piece is, one of the pieces is going to Yale, another piece is going to Columbia. I'm looking for other pieces, international spaces. Right now, it's slated to be installed at the Memorial Union at the Arizona campus. But like, for example, think about this, you've got it in a clinical situation, and you're trying to talk to people about what it means to metastasize. So you actually can say, hey, you know, the mother tumor is somewhere, and then this is this piece that's metaphorically traveled, you know, in this case, it probably took a plane, but in your body, it's the bloodstream usually. And then you can also talk about why is it so hard to cure cancer? Look at this piece. It's filled with all these oddball shapes and oddball cells. Each one of those cells are different. That's one of the primary reasons. It's very complicated. And the way that the thing that's interesting about that is that it takes the onus and the conversation away from you, your body, and puts it into this neutral space. These are some other examples of the pieces. Each one is different. This piece with a circular thing, that's like 5 by 5. That's the mother lode. We also have this project at the ASU campus. It's called Endless Forms Most Beautiful. And it's a somatically mutated cactus garden. And this is an example of one of the pieces. The cacti are doing really well. And the message is these cactus are living with cancer. They're living a good life, and you can too. So it's got a very positive message. As part of this show, I decided it would be really important to talk to people that had cancer because I was a little worried about triggering, right? You wouldn't want a bunch of people to come in there and then it would trigger really bad things. And instead, it actually was really good. It was the Arizona Cancer group. And these are some of the quotes. I was so moved and grateful to be able to experience the artwork. It showcased beautifully a lot of my experience as a thriver, which I really like that. Thriver is pretty good. It was nice to be validated through art. I was surprised by the focus on science and thankful for it. A diverse, insightful, and thought-provoking exhibit that would be very beneficial for so many to see, both those directly impacted by cancer and even more importantly, by those who have not been impacted. I think what happens is that a lot of these folks that have cancer have disappeared. Nobody wants to talk to them about this. It's uncomfortable. It's a bad thing to talk about. The big idea. These are sort of the cores of the exhibition. So it's designed as a traveling exhibition. It's especially designed crates that easily ship. So it's designed to go all around the world. Right now, it's at Biodesign in Phoenix. It's slated to go to the Mesa Library, the public library downtown. It is in October going to the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center in New Lebanon, New Hampshire. You guys are talking about possibly doing it here. And so it's really designed as this to act as this catalyst, be able to get people talking about the realities of the disease, the impact of the disease. For researchers, I think it's really important not to lose sight of why you're doing the work you are. It's really easy. I must admit that science is so much more interesting than I ever thought it could be. But it's also like, why are you doing this? I started this group called Navigating Cancer with Science and Art. The NCI has some groups called like CSBC, which is Cancer Systems Biology Consortium. Through that group, I met a lot of people who are really interested in outreach. My own personal feeling is that art is the quintessential outreach tool. We made a website. Contacting the server for information. That doesn't look good, does it? Let's see if it's going to come up. Yeah, cool. So this is a group of scientists, computer modelers, researchers all over the country. Some of them are international, and it's an opportunity to start these dialogues. And the NCSA germinates and supports collaborations between professional artists and scientists that empower multidisciplinary approaches to the discovery of novel ways to communicate cancer to diverse communities. One of the things that's cool about this and about the residency program that I run, it is different than most residency programs. Most residency programs feature people that happen to get cancer and then they go to art as a therapeutic tool. This is artists at the top of their game meeting with equal scientists, right? So the conversation, it's equals and equals challenged with this particular problem of cancer. These folks are all sorts of different people. This is the C word. This is the one that we're looking at right now. It's a core. Some of them are from Yale, some from, Doro is from Yale and Diana's from Columbia. And then we also have support from SAGE, which is sort of a nonprofit that supports NCI. So there's a lot of different relationships that this group is taking advantage of. We just put this up so the members are not articulated here, nor are the projects, but you can see that it's a pretty interesting project. And what's cool about it is that, for example, if you guys wanted this show, which is really, it's pretty small, you can fit into hallways, but you can expand it or you can contract it. So it's like going to a smorgasbord and going, I want this hot dog, I want this burger, I want this. And you can decide what you want. You can also say, hey, you know what, I want, for our opening, I want a performance by Carl Flink, who's a choreographer out of Minnesota. And by the way, I met him at the CSBC, he was mentioned, and I contacted him. And he's done this project with a scientist named Ode out of Minneapolis, where they model cellular activity. And he told me this great story with these scientists all hanging around. There were like 4 of them, and they're looking at these dancers who are modeling this activity within the cell, and they go, you know, I think maybe our assumptions about what's going on inside that cell is not correct. So it makes you rethink your own assumptions, which I think is a very powerful thing. So there's people that do social practice. You could have them come and do an opening. You could have them come, say you have a board member or somebody who's been around, is going to retire for a long time. People can do personal songs that have all the stuff that he did for you over 20 years. And you could present that. So it's kind of like this model of artists being able to work with you in all these different ways. And of course, the residencies are really the core of the whole thing, but it doesn't have to be residency based. The big idea is that we take this model and we expand it to go to international. So what happens then? We're talking to people in Greece, in Qatar, in Bahrain, like in Bahrain, for example. Nobody talks about cancer because it'll affect their marriage prospects. So that's an incredible, to me, that is an incredible thing. It is a totally closeted disease. Nobody wants to talk about it. So what happens if you start peeling that away? And I think artworks are actually a really great way to start doing that. And that's it. So we do have time for Q&A. Oh, I'm good. Because I feel like that's the most important part. So James, you're going to facilitate the Q&A. I'm hoping that you have questions because I feel like it's the dialogue is the richest part of these things. So.
Well, I'll actually start it off. I'll break the ice because that's actually what my question is, you know, well, I guess it's partly statement, but I'd love to hear your input on it. So one of the things I find that's wonderful about the artwork is that it can serve as sort of an icebreaker to allow people to discuss something. Like you say, it's the C word because no one wants to talk about it. And we all have friends who have cancer and are living with cancer, and now those that have died of cancer. And, you know, it depends on the person, how easy it is to approach them about their cancer. Some are very open about it and it's not a problem, but other people, you're always a little uncomfortable. So I don't know. I mean, how does this work at a sort of personal level with your particular friends? How can art serve as that sort of icebreaker in that sense?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think I use the word neutral. It's like another space. I think the big challenge, and I was talking to Jim last night about this, is how do you get people there? Because the C word is such a huge block, which is why we call it the C word, not, oh, here, come on down to a show on cancer, right? So I don't really have a great answer for that, James, because I think that is the challenge. But I do feel the beauty and the aesthetics or the ideas are the way to go. So like you could look at this piece as strictly an artwork, right? And then you can say, oh, by the way, it's also a cancer. It's a cancer tumor, you know? So I think that is sort of the strategy, is to attract people into the beauty of it, the thinking of it, and then back into what is this thing. So I guess that's my answer.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. Anyone in the audience have a question before we go online with them?
Yes, I do. Hello, this is David Weil. And
Hi,
hi. So my question is a little bit about, viewing artwork kind of in isolation potentially. People are going to see artwork at times in a space that may not have any type of support system, and artwork can be like a trigger, an emotional trigger for a lot of people. I run an art gallery on campus. You're going to come by and see me later today, but we've had some pretty emotional art exhibits, and I found that occasionally I'll walk into the gallery and I'll find someone sitting on one of our benches, kind of emotionally upset, tearful, and I sit down sometimes if I can and talk to them and find out what's going on, and I think that that's kind of a part of this type of art, is because it's such an emotional trigger, and I don't know if you've thought about or had experiences in how to manage the impact on the viewers.
Yeah, David, that's a really important question. This show is designed to be as not triggering as possible, but because of its very content, let's face it, it's about cancer, it will trigger some people. Maybe triggering is not quite the right term, but make them think about people that they've lost with cancer, for example. I would love to do what I did for an AIDS show many years ago. It was called, what was it called? I can't remember. It was a large NSF supported AIDS exhibition, which we brought to the Exploratorium. And I was concerned about this particular problem. And at the same time, there was an artist named Trimpen who contacted me. He wanted to do it was a heat organ, a flame organ. And I said, Trimpen, the only money we have is AIDS money. And it was like hard for me to get those two things together, but I slept on it. It's actually a point of pride that I could put these two things together, because I realized the flame organ could be this amazing space where people who had lost people to AIDS could go in there. And it was these cylinders, these acrylic cylinders, and then a heat source underneath, and they were like droning like that, and they were tuned. And it was kind of cathedral-like. You could go in there, it was darkened, and people could go in there and cry. I'd like to be able to do that with this show. I think it would be important to do. This particular show is quite pulled, if that makes sense. It's emotionally pulled. So there's not a lot of deep patient voice here where patients are talking about the emotional part of this thing. And that's intentional, because I didn't have the money or the space to actually do the right thing, which would be to have that kind of place for people to go, and people are aware that it's provided for them for that. So that's how I would respond to it in a better world, a world with more money.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. My name is Jasmine. I work at Children's Hospital. And maybe I missed this because I was a little bit late, but I was wondering if you could elaborate more on the residency piece of this program.
Yeah. So the structure of it is actually, it's designed to be low impact for any research lab. We start with an exploratory residency. The researchers have to buy into the artist and be excited about the artist. The best ones are when we know there's already a chemistry between them. And then the artist goes into the lab for a week, like maybe 4 to 5 days. They do presentations, the researchers do presentations, maybe patients talk, but we start talking. And then they go away. There's no expectation. It's just, hi, I'm here. This is who I am, kind of thing. After that, the artists, based on what they've learned, come with some proposals. If those proposals are good and the research lab likes them, then the lab will hire them to do a piece. And usually that requires them coming back for a longer stay, more money, more time, more depth. And that works really well. Now with the Navigating Cancer, the NCSA thing, I've started thinking how interesting it would be if we actually, because we're going to be doing some speed dating within that group, if the scientists and the artists are already sort of having great conversations and there's some chemistry between them, it might be interesting to have them both go to the residency. So the researcher is getting exposed to new scientific ideas, and they might be able to bring that back to their lab and go, oh my God, you should see what Denver's up to, right? And then the artist has got a whole nother lens, and they're creating work based on that. So that's how it's really a low bar for knowing whether you could do like 4 exploratory residencies a year and only come out with maybe 2 that you really wanted to push forward. Does that help, Jasmine?
Yes, thank you. And what does a timeline on something like that look like in terms of coordination?
It's variable. Each residency is specially designed. So it can be, you know, like like COVID really screwed us up. Both Aaron and Max are supposed to come to our labs, but because of COVID and they were both have cancer, so we didn't want to expose them at all. They're coming to our lab soon. The other thing I should mention that's kind of interesting is going forward, I thought it would be really interesting to look at the 17 sustainable goals of the United Nations. You should check them out if you haven't looked at them, because they're really interesting. They're things like access to clean water, climate change, social justice. They're really neat. They're really, yeah, like if we could solve all this stuff, we'd be golden, right? So going forward, after Aaron and Max come, I'll be looking at 2 of those. I pulled out 2, social justice and climate change. And I'd like to do an exercise. I'm thinking about doing this as a workshop with researchers and artists, but I think it'd also be interesting to do with students, where you go, okay, the exercise is cancer on this side, and then you have the 17 sustainable goals. So how does cancer interrelate with clean water, for example? Or how does cancer interrelate with climate change? And I got this idea because I was reading this article about the most northern city in Russia. This city, their only way of making a living is producing a material that's required for our technology, right? But it's highly carcinogenic. So what happens is they have, you know, they work until they're like 60, they retire, and they die of cancer, right? So it's those kinds of stories I think need to be told. So I think that's the kind of thing that's really interesting about mixing these brains up. It's really interesting to think about how cancer interrelates with the 17 United Nations Sustainable Goals. So longer answer than you were ready for.
Hi, good morning. My name is Lily. I'm a student in Jim Costello's lab, actually. So my cancer is project-based, and I came to it kind of a roundabout way. I was curious because I noticed that you were talking a lot about very high-level researchers and high-level artists being able to collaborate on these really amazing projects. And then you just mentioned in your last answer about potentially trying to extend some of these opportunities to students. I feel like this type of artwork is such an important way for students on the research side, especially, to be able to realize, like, you know, we get very siloed into the projects that we're working on, and this is an important way to remember that there's a lot more impact that our research is having, both good and bad sometimes. So I was curious if you could just speak a little bit more to kind of what pieces of the research community you've gotten the most engagement from, and, you know, what your plans are to continue extending into new populations, I guess.
That's a good question. I mean, you know, it's interesting because not all artists are interested in working with scientists, and not all scientists are interested in working with artists. So you find the people that are interested in working in an interdisciplinary way. The student question is super interesting. We also have this crazy thing called the ACE Scholars. We started 2 years ago with it. It's Christina Bachu and Zach Compton's project. And it was like this little thing where they were just bringing together a small group of students for just to get them, as undergraduates, to get them started to be interested in cancer research. Well, this year there are 50. And we had a meeting at the end of the year last year where the students were talking about how important the group was to them. We were all crying our eyes out at the end because there were so many people where they were like first generation people going to school. There were people that had never in a million years thought that they would ever go into science research for a million reasons. You know, their family's not modeled that way. They're thinking they weren't thinking they could be smart enough. And maybe some of those students will go into museum work, you know, who knows where they'll go. But that opening of doors and that potential and that agency is really powerful. So that's that's a program that we've started, and I think that that's the kind of program that would be great that we're modeling for other organizations. Did that answer your question, Lily?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I never thought I wanted to do cancer research. I thought the only way was either patient care, through a medical career, or research was like basic science and, just looking at basic mechanisms. And I feel like if I had seen a presentation like this when I was an earlier undergrad, it would have opened some of those just paths that you hadn't thought about necessarily. Yeah, and I guess, if there are other ways that we as students can help to cross-pollinate those ideas with you, I just think it's a really impactful project. So,
well, we have
you.
students involved in an NCSA thing. How did you get involved? What was your pathway to this kind of research?
So it's a long story. I'll try to shorten it, but I started on an international affairs, global public health track. That was really all that my family was familiar with. That was kind of all I knew was social sciences. I studied abroad. I went to school for international affairs for 2 years, realized that that type of impact was not the impact that I wanted to feel in my work. I transitioned into going for emergency medicine. I moved to New Mexico from Vermont and went through their Bachelor of Science for emergency medicine, was on a paramedic track, and then was told that I could either do paramedic school or do organic chemistry. And I wanted to see if I would like it or hate it. So turned down paramedic school and went to organic chemistry, and had an incredible teacher who was just a really ball-in woman who showed me that you can have all these different careers that I had never thought about. So I switched into biochemistry and got involved in another woman's lab who's from China. Her entire lab is from China, and being able to see the way that they operate in the research field and the passion that they had for the work that they were doing just totally opened my eyes. And so kind of realizing that you can help people without having to interact with them one by one, and you can make a difference in someone's life when they have a really stressful or critical moment, and you don't necessarily have to be there with them in person. You can do it on a systemic level, but still in a really impactful way. And that was kind of when I was choosing between graduate schools, I found Jim's lab and what Jim does. And I found that just super inspiring, that he's a really amazing scientist and he's not siloed to one specific disease or one specific condition. He doesn't think only about the role of one protein in its, signaling cascade. And so realizing that you can learn all these different tools and apply them to kind of whatever questions you find the most interesting. I think similarly, it's like the integrative approach where I'm learning some computational skills, I'm learning some CRISPR gene editing systems. And when I leave, I'm probably not going to stay in bladder cancer, which is what I'm working on now. But I know that I'll be able to apply those tools to so many different types of projects that will impact people. And so it's been a lot of side steps. I never thought I wanted to do cancer research. I thought it was going to be triggering for me because I have lost people to it as well. But I think seeing the impact from the patient side, that, improved research really helps people not have to not pass away when they shouldn't, or not go through a horrible treatment that has no positive outcome for them. And so I think the more exposure that we have at that early time of realizing that, these careers are not as siloed as we maybe think that they are. Yeah, it's just, that was something that helped me to realize that actually chemistry is more than just making a drug. It's understanding how treatments work in patients that are sick.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the big things we'd really love to achieve with this on the patient level is, we know that one of the biggest problems is people leaving this, getting into denial and saying, I am not dealing with this. And then they find themselves in stage 4 somehow. So how could we, as practitioners of all disciplines, start really trying to sort of erode that response so that people are starting to, it's not just, oh, you have cancer, I'm going to die tomorrow. It's, oh, I think you might have cancer, pre-cancer, whatever. Take steps, don't be so afraid that you decide you're never going to deal with it until it's too late. So I think that's kind of the baseline. That's a big baseline thing. And I think students, researchers, and artists it'd be really good if we were all concerned about that.
Yeah. Thank you for having the discussion.
Yeah, it was great, Lily. I was glad to hear your story.
Yeah. Does anyone online have a question? Because I have one more, but I'll wait. Well, I'll go ahead and ask mine while they're thinking about it. So, you got your start at a Center for Evolutionary Cancer Biology. So is that, do you think that was accidental, or do you think there's something about this sort of evolutionary understanding of cancer that is enriching the art, or sort of changing the art or somehow influencing the art?
I don't think so, because I think it's really about Carlo Meli, Athena Actipus going, hey, this is a great idea. So I really think it's about the what I call facility of mind. Your mind it has the facility of looking at something like cancer, and as Lily was talking about, not looking at it as this tiny little problem, but expansing one's concepts about how to approach it. And we all, I mean, this is a tough one. People have been trying to cure cancer for a long time. Why is it not cured? If it's such an easy thing, we would have cured it a long time ago. So maybe it means that we actually need different ways of thinking about things, and maybe not necessarily from the sciences. It could be from philosophy. It could be from literary places, poetry.
Yeah. No, I do think it's probably partly also that evolutionary cancer biologists, we're all a little bit weird.
See, I don't know that because they're the only ones that I really know. So to me, that the weirdness is normal.
So kind of a follow-up of that, because, cancer is unlike, if we think COVID or if we think bacterial infections, the enemy's coming from outside, right? It's an attack from an outside organism, but cancer is a disease from within, with some exceptions that we don't need to get into, but it's our own body that's evolving to become dangerous. And I don't know, how do you think that informs the art? Because it's a different disease in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I think Max Dean's film really looks at that. He does this stuff, if you're familiar with Thomas Eakins, he was a painter, a 19th century painter, and he did a lot of those anatomy theater paintings, very dark on anatomy theater, and Max kind of replicates that with these interesting dummies that he got out of it was some kind of a fair or something that was going down. I'd forgotten what your question is.
It was sort of like, how does the fact that cancer, unlike sort of an infectious disease, right?
Yeah, so he talks about identity a lot.
Yeah.
And I think it does matter because there is a certain strangeness. I had a scare, a breast cancer scare, and it was a really weird thing to think, that my body is turned against me because it's my body, it's mine, it shouldn't be doing that. And I had that feeling of betrayal. So I think that there's a lot of richness in that. I mean, for better or worse, there's a lot of richness. But you can also start talking about things like we are multicellular beings, and the same mechanisms that we have to have in order to replicate ourselves is also part of when it goes rogue, this thing happens. And I think that there's a lot of conversation and specific artworks that could come out of that very specific issue. I think the other thing, and I'm skating on thin ice scientifically, but this issue of the same thing that allows us to create babies is also sort of interrelated. So I think there's a lot of really interesting concepts to unpack on that, just from an artistic level that you don't have to unpack with other things like COVID.
I should know by now I can't do two things at the same time.
Is there a question from the online people? I think that may have just been someone unmuted.
Oh, maybe so.
Any questions from online?
I have a question for you guys. Can I ask a question?
You can absolutely.
Okay, so given that this, I'm talking about art, and art is seen by many people as the cherry on top. It's not necessary, you can do without it. Given the work that you're all doing, have I nipped away at that idea that it is actually more important than you might at first blush think? And I will also add, one of the things that I think is very interesting in our culture, when you're going into school, everybody has to have science when they're going through their curriculum, but not everybody has to have art. So I kind of think, to a degree, not very many people are as educated about art as they are about the sciences. It's just part of it's. I mean, like in California, where my kids grew up, they didn't have art until they were seniors in high school. They had some music because the the parents were paying for it, but it's seen as this kind of flippy thing, you know, you don't really. So my question is, what do you guys think? Do you think that it's an important thing? Do you think that it's kind of like, yeah, and I don't mind if you're honest, because I actually enjoy if you're honest and just say, you know, you haven't convinced me. I'd be curious to know.
Hi, I'm Alex. I work on more of the computational biology side, but I absolutely think that they're complementary to each other. I think science has a lot to benefit from art because it could be difficult to communicate science to people who may not understand fully what you do day to day or like what this result actually means. And the conversation between artists and scientists is essential on both sides so that the artist can continue to connect to people and get them drawn into the message, and then the scientist can communicate what the message is saying and how it relates back to them on a personal level.
Thank you, Alex. You're reminding me, one thing I forgot to say about this show is that it includes quotes from the researchers and the scientists, not only about the work that they do and why they do it, but they also comment about the art. So the voices of the scientists are embedded within the show. And when it goes to a new place, we will take the researcher's voice and we'll put what they think and put it into the show so that it's actually exhibiting exactly what you're talking about, where you actually get to understand what the scientists are up to. And from a social point, that's important. From a funding point, I think that's important. I think that people have this idea, they just don't know, like, what are you guys doing in that lab? You know, what are you doing? So I appreciate that answer.
I was just going to say, I was struck by a comment you made about one of the earlier pieces that you presented, saying that this work is designed to draw people in instead of to kind of push them out. And I think that's just a hugely critical piece of science communication, that the way communication has historically been presented, it's really been made by and for predominantly, like, you know, white, straight, cis communities. And so when you are able to generate new tools to communicate to people that take away some of those initial barriers of like, here's a 60-page black and white single spaced pamphlet about your cancer, to being able to say this is something you might actually be able to look at without wanting to, you know, I don't know, have a horrible time. I just think that's a really critical piece of the communication, that it's something that people will actually want to receive.
Yeah, I did a show called The Changing Face of What is Normal, and it was coinciding with the publication of the 5th DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and it had all of these objects that had been discovered in a hospital in upstate New York. The patients had taken their prized possessions with them and then never got to see them again, right? So from a very specific point of view, there's like this emotional thing. So we had a whole area, this sort of answers David's question. We had an area where it was a talk back area, and we had all these questions. At the time, it was the Colorado shootings. And the question would be like, do you think people should be forced to take medication against their will? And these are really important questions. And people would sit down in this area and they'd spend 45 minutes carefully crafting what they thought. And they'd add it to the wall. And then you'd see other people going, what he said, that's what I think too. And so there was this amazing dialogue, you know, like, or what kinds of objects would you bring? So there are real ways to get the conversations going in an equitable way. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing social justice next time, because let's face it, cancer cancer affects everybody, but affects some people more than others. And I want to get down to like, why is that? So a lot of it's environmental, you know, a lot of it's where you live, what you drink, what you eat, what you have access to. And I think that's going to get to some of those things. When I was at the museum, I really wanted people to go into the museum and see themselves there. If they don't see themselves there, if it's like, oh, it's just, you know, older white guys. I love older white guys. I'm married to one. But, you know, if it's only those guys, then maybe you'll just turn around and go, this is not for me. There's a guy named Fred Wilson, African-American guy who did a residency at the Williamsburg History Museum. And he walked into the museum and he went, oh my God, I do not belong here. But then he realized that he could actually do some interesting things. So like in these traditional history museums, they have like silver urns and stuff. And so he was ferreting around the back and he found slave manacles, right? So he just placed the slave manacles there. And then it just had, you know, metalwork circa 1715 or whatever. And then he had like, there would be like a beautiful oil painting, you know, the traditional oil paintings with all the white people in the fields having a lovely little time. And he would just add a new label, and that label said, Frederick serving fruit. And you look and you realize there's this small African-American boy serving fruit. So I think, and that to me was a seminal thing about how you can change people's perceptions just by the lens through which you view it. So I feel like all of this work is kind of doing that. It's just changing your perception of this disease enough so that you can really think about it in new ways.
Great.
Great presentation. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Heather Coates. I'm assistant professor at the College of Nursing. And I'm curious, because we've had this word a lot, researchers, if you could speak to the kind of intersection of like art and medicine, which I think has been there from, you know, way back in the Greek time, Asclepius, who was, you know, the art, and Hippocratic, which was the science. So what is the range of the researchers that you're talking about within your institution, since we are researchers and we range from social science to cancer biologists to computational, you know, systems management?
Well, I mean, in an ideal world, for me, the world does not fit into art and science completely. You know, it's not like these binary things are all encompassing. So I've been wanting to do like a 4-day think tank kind of a thing where people from all walks of life. So you could see sociologists getting involved. You could see philosophers getting involved. All sorts of people who are researching different things. Politics, God, I mean, what does it, when you think about cancer, what does cancer not touch? I'm trying to think. I don't even know. I mean, maybe a car, but I can even see a car somehow interrelating with cancer. So I think any kind of researcher, honestly, any kind, it's really about what their interest. If they are interested in shaking up the way that they think about their own research, I think they're fair game, you know, but it's really, there's some people that just really, they just leave me alone. I'm just doing my thing. I'm happy over here, and I leave them alone. But if they are actually saying, I really would love to shake up the way I think about my own work, come on down. So that's what I think. Did that answer your question?
I think that's a great final thing to say, because it is so true. It stimulates the creative neurons in the brain. And if, you know, and I think not only is it like we talked about it being an icebreaker, but I think art can be so important for just making you think a little bit different about a problem and making you see it through a different lens. And so anyway, it's fantastic discussion. You know, to have a seminar that was half seminar, half discussion, half, you know, ideas being presented like this is wonderful. And so thanks so much.
I appreciate you guys very much. So the work you do, thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And everyone, thanks for coming. I see a bunch of people online as well. So wonderful.
Thanks online people.
So let's thank Pam one more time.